Hello, my name is Peyton. 3 months ago, I packed sandwiches, smiled at my brother, and followed him up a mountain, just like we did when we were kids. But this time, he pushed me off a cliff and whispered, "Fly away." Everyone said I had wandered too far, that I'd been unstable, grieving too hard. They wrote a eulogy. They mourned me online. But what if I told you I never fell by accident? What if the person who shared your childhood bed, your family photos, your mother's funeral, was the same one who tried to erase you from the world? Would you climb back up? Would you come back? Or would you let them bury you with a smile? It was early, the kind of morning where the sun hasn't quite decided whether to rise or hide. Light crawled reluctantly across the window panes of my father's house, the one I've kept standing all these years, and still, it didn't feel like mine, not really. The floorboards creaked under my slippers like they were whispering a language I wasn't fluent in anymore. I walked through the living room, paused at the same coffee table I'd cleaned 1,000 times, and noticed a smudge of fingerprint I hadn't left. Everything in that house had my prints, but none of it bore my name. People don't talk about what it's like to become a ghost while you're still alive, to pour your days into someone else's comfort, then realize the walls don't remember your voice. My name wasn't on the deed, wasn't on the medical records, and lately, it wasn't even in the family photos. Still, I stayed, cooked the meals, paid the bills, sat next to my father every morning as he stared out the window and forgot a little more of who I was. 2 months ago, we had one of those hospital meetings, the kind where you assume your opinion matters until you're reminded it doesn't. I'd been caring for Dad day in and day out for 3 years, managing his meds, making his appointments, bathing him when he couldn't lift his arms. I thought those things meant something. Turns out, I thought wrong. We were sitting at St. Charles Medical Center. I had my notepad ready, questions prepared, papers in a folder. A nurse walked in, glanced at me, then turned straight to Corwin. "Mr. Ashcroft," she said, "we need your signature on the updated medical directive." Corwin smiled, like he'd been handed a VIP pass, took the clipboard, didn't even look at me. "Sure," he said, clicking the pen. "Glad to take care of it." I cleared my throat. "Excuse me, I thought we were supposed to go over this together?" He turned to me, not unkindly, just dismissively, like I was interrupting something he'd already decided. "You're great with emotions, sis. I handle the real stuff." That sentence, it didn't land like a slap. It landed like a knife slid under the skin, quiet and intentional. I didn't say anything after that. Just nodded and stared at the signature he added under his name, Corwin Ashcroft, power of attorney. I sat in the passenger seat on the way home, biting my tongue so hard I tasted iron. He hummed along to the radio, oblivious. Or maybe not. Maybe that was part of the performance. The next weekend was the 1-year memorial for our mom. We did something small. Just a few cousins, a pot of chili, some old photos. I pulled down the frame from the mantelpiece, one of Mom, Corwin, and me on a beach in Monterey, sunburned, laughing. I left it out for someone to set on the table. When the guests arrived, I noticed a different picture had been placed there instead. It was Mom and Corwin at his college graduation, just the two of them. She was holding his diploma like it belonged to her, which, in many ways, it did. I asked my cousin Jenna about the switch. She looked nervous, like I'd caught her doing something shameful. "We just thought it looked more composed," she mumbled. "We couldn't find one where you both looked happy." I nodded slowly, like I understood. And in a way, I did. Corwin had always been the smiling one, the charming one, the one people posted on Facebook with captions like, "My hero," and "Family man." I was the one who stayed in the background, holding the camera, not making a fuss. That day, I spent most of the gathering refilling drinks and checking the oven. No one asked me to. It's just what I do. I stood at the kitchen sink, washing out a casserole dish, and listened to them laugh in the other room. My name didn't come up once. After everyone left, I took the old photo and climbed into the attic. I hadn't been up there in years. Dust greeted me like an old friend. Boxes lined the walls, school awards, Mom's recipe books, Dad's war medals, Corwin's baby clothes. My name was on 2 small boxes in the corner. One of them was filled with pictures I'd taken over the years. I pulled out a frame that hadn't seen daylight in decades. There we were, Corwin and I at a school field day. I was 12. He was 9. I had him by the hand, pulling him toward the finish line while he laughed so hard his knees buckled. I held that photo for a long time, studied our faces, remembered how I used to protect him without question. I kept everything, Corwin, I whispered. Even you. The house was too quiet the next morning. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. This was something heavier, something that felt like silence had settled over everything and dared me to make noise. I moved through the kitchen without turning on the lights, letting the soft gray of the sky seep through the windows. Dad was still asleep in his chair, wrapped in the old plaid blanket I'd tucked around him the night before. I cracked 2 eggs into a pan and slid slices of bread into the toaster. The motions were automatic, muscle memory from a life of service. I didn't think about breakfast. I thought about that attic, about the picture in my lap and the realization that had finally taken root in me like a splinter. This wasn't neglect. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was choice. I'd just plated Dad's food when I heard Corwin's footsteps coming down the hall. He yawned loudly, like someone who hadn't lifted a finger in months should, and walked into the kitchen like he owned the place. "Morning," he said, reaching for the coffee pot before I could. "You're up early?" "I'm always up early," I replied, keeping my voice steady. He didn't respond, just sipped his coffee, then glanced at the table and smirked. "Still doing the whole caretaker routine, huh?" "I live here," I said. "Do you?" His tone was light, joking, but not really. I didn't answer. Instead, I moved to Dad's side and gently nudged his shoulder. He stirred, blinked, and smiled when he saw me. Corwin sat down at the table, flipping through his phone. He didn't even look up when he said, "So, about yesterday. I get that you were upset. It's just a photo, Peyton. Let's not make everything a soap opera." "You replaced a picture of Mom and me with one of just you and her." He shrugged. "Because it was cleaner. Better lighting. We didn't have to crop anyone out." "Crop me out, you mean?" He finally looked at me, smiled. But there was something cold behind it, like his eyes didn't belong to his voice. "You've always been different," he said, spooning some of the eggs onto his plate. "I guess you just never quite fit this family." I didn't blink, didn't move. I just stood there, processing what he'd said. "And maybe," he continued, as casually as if he were discussing the weather, "that's because you don't actually carry the Ashcroft blood. Did Mom ever tell you that?" "No?" "Huh." The pan in my hand dropped into the sink with a clang. Water splashed. My chest tightened. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice low. "Just, you know, family secrets." He was still smiling. "Don't take it personally. It doesn't change anything. You're still you." I walked out before I could say something I'd regret, or maybe something I'd be proud of. Outside, the air was cold against my skin. I wrapped my arms around myself and stood on the porch, staring out at the tree line. I'd planted those trees when I was 16. Every single one. Dug the holes, hauled the saplings, watered them through high school. I remembered Mom standing beside me, handing me lemonade, telling me they'd grow taller than me one day. Was she lying the whole time? Back inside, I pulled down the photo albums. Page after page of birthdays, holidays, school plays. There she was, front row, clapping for me, hugging me, making costumes by hand. If I wasn't her daughter, then why? Why did it feel like love? I didn't find a single thing that confirmed or denied what Corwin said, just a gnawing emptiness where certainty used to live. I needed air. Real air. I grabbed my keys and drove into town. The grocery store parking lot was half full, the usual retirees and moms with strollers pushing carts through the sliding doors. I ran into Janine near the canned goods. We'd gone to school together. She looked up from her shopping list, eyes widening when she saw me. "Hey," she said, voice a little too careful. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I replied automatically. "Why?" She hesitated. "Corwin stopped by the shop yesterday. He mentioned you've been having kind of a hard time lately. He said you've been off, that you might be grieving a little too hard. Something about meds? My stomach dropped. He said what? I didn't believe him, she added quickly. I told him that's not like you. But he said he was worried, said you weren't sleeping, that maybe you were seeing things that weren't there. I nodded, once. It took all my strength not to scream. Thanks for telling me, I said. Janine put a hand on my arm. If you ever need to talk, I'm good, I said. Really. I paid for a carton of milk and a loaf of bread I didn't need and drove home in silence. Inside the house, I didn't take off my coat. I stood in front of the shelf where we kept the urn. Mom's ashes were inside, polished and pristine, untouched since the day we brought them back. I stared at it, my hand hovering just above the cool metal lid. I've protected them long enough, Mom, I whispered. Maybe it's time to protect myself. I stared at the photo he'd sent for a long time before responding. It was us, Corwin and me, somewhere on a trail outside Sun River. And I was maybe 12, him 9. I had both hands gripping his wrists, pulling him up over a slick rock while he laughed, hair wet from a drizzle. Mom had taken the picture, and for years she kept it pinned to the fridge. I'd always thought it was one of her favorites. Underneath the photo, his message read, "Funny how you were always pulling me up. Let's do it again. One more hike, like old times." There it was again, that charm he wielded like a polished weapon, warm, nostalgic, effortlessly disarming. And for a second, I let it sink in. The sweetness of the memory, the illusion of affection. But then I remembered Janine's face in the grocery store, Corwin's words about Mom, the photo I'd found tucked in a forgotten box. And still, a part of me wanted to believe he meant this, that he was trying to make things right. I didn't answer immediately. I set my phone face down on the nightstand, pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders, and sat at the edge of the bed. The hum of the house filled the silence, water running in the pipes, the tick of the kitchen clock, the far-off buzz of a neighbor's mower, life going on while mine was stuck somewhere between memory and manipulation. That evening he called, "Hey, you get my text?" His voice was smooth as ever, familiar. "I saw it," I said. There was a pause, then a chuckle. "Look, I know things have been tense. Let's not make it a whole thing. I figured maybe we could go hiking again. You know, like back when we were just brother and sister, before life got so damn complicated." I let the silence hang for a moment. "Where?" "Mount Bachelor. There's a new trail, almost no foot traffic. Quiet. You'll love it. Scenic as hell." I glanced at the picture again. "What time?" "I'll pick you up at 7. And hey, bring sandwiches like Mom used to make. Ham, mustard, extra pickles. I still dream about those." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Sure, like old times." The call ended. I stood up, stretched my arms, and walked to the laundry room. The boots I'd used last were in a bin near the back, mud still crusted around the soles. I pulled them out, grabbed a cloth, and sat on the floor to clean them. A chore to keep my hands busy while my mind worked overtime. When I finished, I went to Corwin's old room to find the windbreaker he'd borrowed from me years ago and never returned. I figured I'd reclaim it. Opened the top drawer, and there it was. Not the jacket. A manila envelope, half-tucked behind a stack of old board games. I didn't even know why I opened it. Maybe I was just curious. Maybe some part of me was waiting for another blow. Inside was a real estate agreement. 2 pages, legal wording, signatures, mine, or it looked like mine. My heart slowed. I sat on the bed and read every line, every date. The transfer was of the cabin in Crescent Lake, our mother's weekend retreat, the one she left to both of us. But according to this, I had signed my share over to Corwin. The date on the document was 2 days before the memorial. The ink looked fresh. I never signed this. I closed my eyes, folded the paper back into the envelope, and sat there, motionless. It wasn't just a bad photo or a harsh comment or a whispered rumor. This was fraud. This was theft. This was war. I looked around the room, at the shelves full of trophies he never dusted, the bedspread still crisp from Mom's last cleaning. the baseball cards on the desk, the smell of cedar and cologne. Then I turned my eyes to the framed portrait hanging on the wall. Our whole family at the Oregon Dunes, years ago. I stood beside Corwin, one hand on Mom's shoulder, a smile I now realized was forced. I took it off the wall. I didn't throw it. I didn't smash it. I simply walked out with it, crossed the hall, and laid it flat inside the closet in my own room. That night, I couldn't sleep. I laid in bed with the envelope beside me. Read the document again. My name. His. The notary seal. A name I didn't recognize. Was this what he meant by pulling me up? Was this how he defined family? I went downstairs around midnight and started packing a small day bag. First aid kit, extra socks, water, phone charger. I made the sandwiches Corwin asked for, though the act felt almost grotesque now. I sliced the pickles too thin, on purpose. At 3 a.m., I wrote a note and sealed it in an envelope marked, "In case something happens." I placed it under the old cookie jar. Then I sat on the porch and waited for dawn. He pulled up exactly at 7, just like he said, window down, music playing. He smiled like a man who hadn't just erased his sister from a deed. "Ready for an adventure?" he asked. I nodded, handing him the sandwich bag. "Yeah, let's go hiking." Corwin said it like it was nothing, just another friendly suggestion from a brother trying to reconnect. "Let me help you up there." We'd been on the trail for about an hour by then, winding through tall pines and uneven terrain just outside of Mount Bachelor. The sun hadn't fully claimed the sky yet, still cloaked in soft grays and blues, and there was a coolness to the air that should have made the morning feel refreshing. But every step I took with Corwin beside me felt heavier than the last. He was already waiting when I stepped out of the house. Leaning against his truck like a man who had no worries, no conscience, he tossed my hiking bag in the back, complimented the sandwiches I'd made, ham, mustard, and those damn pickles, and turned up the volume on the classic rock station as we drove. I said little, just enough to keep the morning from feeling suspicious. I watched the way he smiled at nothing, the way he kept checking his rearview mirror as we made the turn onto the access road. There were no other cars, no hikers, no park rangers waving us into designated lots. When we arrived, he parked on a gravel patch at the edge of the forest. No signposts, no trailhead maps, just the two of us and a beaten path swallowed by trees. I hesitated. "This trail doesn't look marked," I said, trying not to sound accusatory. He waved a dismissive hand. "Locals' secret. We used to take this one with Dad, remember?" We didn't. I remembered every hike I ever went on with Dad. This wasn't one of them. Still, I forced a small nod and followed him. The forest was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful. More like a vacuum, pulling at your senses. I could hear my own breath, the crunch of every step, the soft swish of tree branches in the wind. No birdsong, no distant laughter from other hikers. Nothing. Corwin carried himself like a man who'd planned this outing down to the hour. He led the way, pointing out occasional moss-covered rocks and making small talk about childhood memories. I answered in one-word replies, watching his body language more than his face. Then came the phrase. We were nearing a sharp incline, more rock than trail, and he looked back at me with that polished grin and said, "You've always wanted to get to the top. I think today's your day, Peyton. I'll help you get up there, really high." I stopped walking. He didn't. He kept moving forward, stepping onto the first boulder like a tour guide leading the way. I took a breath, hoping the sound of it didn't betray me. That sentence, it echoed in my chest like a warning bell. "You know," I said, trying to keep my voice even, "we can just enjoy the view from here. No need to prove anything." Corwin turned slowly, his smile still intact. "Oh, but you deserve to be remembered from the summit." I didn't respond. I looked past him, up the ridge. The incline was steep. On either side, the drop-offs grew more dramatic. One wrong step, one slip, and it'd take a miracle to survive the fall. I adjusted my shoelace and bent down, pretending it had come loose. In reality, I was buying myself time. Time to check my phone. No signal. Of course, I opened my GPS app anyway and took a screenshot of our last known location. Then I texted it to myself, knowing it wouldn't send now, but maybe it would later if I got back into service range. When I stood back up, Corwin was watching me. "Everything good?" he asked. "Yeah, just making sure my shoe won't betray me." He laughed, the sound hollow in the empty woods. "You always were careful, overthinker." I smiled without my eyes and kept climbing. The trail narrowed, the trees thinned. Now it was mostly rock, some loose gravel, and sharp ridges that jutted out like bones from the earth. The wind picked up as we gained elevation. I squinted, trying to locate any sign of another person. A distant hiker, a parked car, a chirp of a walkie-talkie. Nothing. I started testing him, falling a few paces behind. Watching to see if he slowed. He didn't. I faked a stumble, curious if he'd offer a hand. He didn't. We reached a ledge where the view opened up. To the left, a dramatic drop into a ravine. To the right, a continuation of the ridge toward a peak that looked more dangerous than impressive. Corwin motioned toward it. "Come on," he said, nodding toward the edge. "The best view is up there." I didn't move. Every piece of me wanted to say no, wanted to turn around, find the car, walk back to any form of civilization. But turning my back on him felt riskier than moving forward. I needed to stay in his sight. I needed to stay aware. So I stepped forward, slowly, 1 foot at a time. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to scream, to do something. But instead, I kept moving, kept breathing, kept pretending. Because that's what survivors do when there's no one left to save them. The moment his hand touched my back, I knew. It wasn't rough. It wasn't aggressive. It was almost gentle, like a guide helping someone take a final step. I remember the soft shift of wind on my cheek, the silence, eerie and unbroken. And then, his voice, low and smooth like it belonged to someone else. "Fly away." And I did. Time didn't slow, it snapped. 1 second I was upright, the next I was falling. The earth yanked out from under me, sky flipping upside down. I couldn't scream. My breath caught in my throat, along with every ounce of disbelief. Rocks blurred past my vision, treetops spun above, and then, impact. It wasn't a crash like in the movies. It wasn't loud. It was sudden, brutal. My body slammed into a ledge, lower back taking the brunt, and then my pack, thank God for the pack, caught on something. A root, a branch. I didn't know. I just knew I wasn't tumbling anymore. Everything hurt. For a few seconds, minutes, I couldn't move. My arms were splayed, one leg twisted at a sharp angle. There was something wet and warm on my face. I blinked and saw red smeared across my hand. My blood. Corwin was gone. I lay still, listening, waiting for footsteps. A voice. Something. Nothing. No apology. No, "Are you okay?" Not even a fake panic. Just silence. I shifted, trying to test which parts of my body still worked. Pain shot up from my right hip. My ribs felt bruised, maybe cracked. My left hand responded fine, but my right was numb, tingling like it had been asleep too long. Still no voice, no movement above. I looked up. The ledge I'd fallen from wasn't visible anymore. Just blue sky and the tips of pines. I was alone. I breathed shallowly, trying not to panic, trying to assess. I needed to stop the bleeding first. I reached behind me slowly, pulling my pack up toward my chest. The zipper was jammed, likely dented in the fall, but I found the side pouch still intact. My fingers fumbled, shaking, until I pulled out what I hadn't realized I still had. A photo, bent at the edges, faded slightly, but dry. It was one of me and Mom, from the farmer's market when I was a teenager. We were holding paper bags filled with peaches, both laughing at something just out of frame. On the back, in her handwriting, "If they forget you, you remember who you are." I don't know why I'd brought it. I hadn't even realized I'd packed it. But there it was. A reminder. A whisper. A tether. This wasn't where I ended. I ripped a piece of fabric from my sleeve and pressed it to the gash at my temple. Blood trickled slower now, and the pounding in my skull had dulled to a throb. I checked my legs again. One ankle was swelling fast, but it didn't feel broken. The other foot, thankfully, could bear weight, though I hadn't tested it fully. My belt came off next, wrapped tightly around my upper thigh to stabilize the pain that had been shooting up with every breath. I made a splint from a snapped branch, tied it with the extra fabric from my shirt. I was not going to die here. Corwin thought I would. That was his mistake. He thought I'd vanish quietly, just like I always had, that no one would question it. The grieving sister, always a little too sensitive, who wandered too close to the edge. Maybe that's how he'd tell it. But I was still here. I started crawling. Slowly at first, dragging myself across uneven rock and pine needles, inch by painful inch. My fingers dug into the earth, pulling me toward the tree line, toward shadow, toward cover. The sun was rising higher now, warming the back of my neck. I welcomed it, felt its heat as proof I was still alive. Still fighting. The ridge curved downward to my left, forming a slope, not gentle, but not vertical either. I took my chances and aimed that way, hoping it would lead to a clearer path. Every movement sent a flare of pain through my lower back, but I bit down and pushed through. A couple of times, I stopped to breathe, not because I wanted to, because I had to. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps again. I froze, heart hammering, but it was nothing. Just the wind shifting branches somewhere high above me. Eventually, I found a patch of softer ground, sheltered beneath a fallen log. I crawled underneath it to rest. My body was shaking, the adrenaline burning off, leaving behind exhaustion and raw, stripped nerves. Lying there, I let myself feel it all. Not the pain, but the betrayal. The boy I had pulled up a hillside was now the man who'd tried to send me off one. No warning, no fight, just a push and a smile. I'd saved him more times than I could count, defended him from bullies, covered for him when he failed classes, helped him pay rent when his business tanked. And still, somehow, he decided I was in his way. Well, I may have fallen, but I hadn't disappeared. I closed my eyes and pictured Corwin walking back down the trail without a second glance, maybe rehearsing what he'd say, maybe already planning the phone calls, the tears, the public grief, the performance. Let him think I was gone. Let him build his story. I wasn't going to ruin it. Not yet. But I would return, and I wouldn't just come back with anger. I'd come back with truth. The door didn't open right away. I remember the moment too well, collapsing onto the porch, the wood slick and gritty beneath my palms. My vision blurred at the edges, but the shape of the cabin was unmistakable. It looked like it had been there for decades, tucked into the forest like it grew from the roots themselves. Its green paint peeled in long strips, wind-worn and rain-beaten, leaning slightly to one side like it had grown tired of holding itself up. I pounded on the door again, with the last of my strength. My fist made a dull, wooden thud. No answer. So I let myself slide down, my back pressed against the siding, legs splayed across the warped floorboards. I tried to breathe slow, but every inhale came jagged, shallow. My ribs ached. My head throbbed in rhythm with my heartbeat. My right leg, God, my leg, felt like it was on fire. Every time I shifted, it screamed. Above me, the trees swayed gently, their branches whispering secrets I couldn't quite hear. I stared up, waiting for something, a light, a voice, the sound of boots on wood, anything. And then, I heard it. A creak. Slow. Hesitant. Floorboards shifting just beyond the threshold. The door cracked open just a few inches, and behind it stood a woman. She was lean, sun-worn, with short, pale hair tied back in a loose knot that looked like it had been done without a mirror. Her face was lined, not with age, but with weather and time and knowledge. She looked like someone who had lived out here for years, who knew how to start a fire in a storm and fix a roof before it caved in. I opened my mouth to speak. The sound that came out was barely more than a breath. "Help!" The door opened wider. "Jesus," she muttered, her voice low and firm. "Hang on." She stepped outside immediately, kneeling beside me in one smooth motion. Her hands moved fast, assessing, scanning. "Where are you hurt?" "My leg, my head." She checked both with practiced care. Her fingers were rough, sure. "You're lucky," she said, glancing at my leg. You really shouldn't be alive. I tried to smile, but even that took too much energy. I know. She didn't waste time asking what happened. Not then. She slipped one arm under my shoulders and braced the other beneath my knees, guiding me inside without comment. I bit back a cry as she lifted and half-carried me across the threshold and laid me down on a narrow cot near the fireplace. The inside of the cabin was spare, functional. No decorations, no clutter, just the essentials. A table, a stove, a few shelves lined with books and tins. The cot smelled faintly of cedar and old blankets. She disappeared into a back room and returned moments later with a canteen, a granola bar, and a first aid kit big enough to belong in an ambulance. Her movements were focused, efficient. "I'm Rivka," she said, kneeling next to me again. "You're going to need stitches. I can manage it here." "Okay," I said softly. "You fall?" I hesitated. My throat tightened. I was pushed. She paused. Her hand froze over the antiseptic bottle. Her eyes met mine. "Say that again." "My brother, he pushed me." Her jaw clenched, but her expression didn't shift. "Brown hair? Mid to late 30s? Black hydration pack?" I blinked. "Yes." She exhaled slowly, sat back on her heels. "I saw you two, yesterday, 2 ridges over. I was setting up for a solo overnight. He was pacing the overlook, kept looking around like he was being watched. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but then I heard him." My stomach nodded. "He said something?" She nodded. "Clear as day. He said, 'Fly away.' Then it got quiet. Tears pricked at the edges of my eyes, not from pain, but from the sudden, bone-deep relief of being believed, of knowing I hadn't imagined it." She shook her head, muttering, "He wasn't hiking. He was hunting." We didn't speak for a while after that. She cleaned my wounds gently, wrapping my leg tight, applying antiseptic to the gash on my scalp. She worked in silence, only breaking it to ask if something hurt too much. The fire crackled in the background, the warmth slowly bleeding back into my limbs. After I'd eaten half the granola bar and downed most of the water, Rivka pulled out a map. It was old and well-used, its edges soft with wear. She pointed to a ridge marked with a red X. "You fell from here," she said. "The fact that you made it this far means you crawled about 2 miles. 6 hours, I murmured. She gave a low whistle. "That's not crawling. That's surviving." I followed the path with my finger, still barely believing it. "I thought I was going to die." "But you didn't," she said firmly. I looked at her more closely. Her eyes were clear and calm. There was something in them. Pain, yes, but something else too. Steadiness. Quiet fury. "Recognition. You've seen this before," I said. She didn't blink, just nodded. "Different story. Same flavor of betrayal." I didn't ask her to explain. I didn't need her to. Some things don't require translation. Later, after she'd propped my leg up with a pillow and covered me with a worn wool blanket, I unzipped the pouch on my bag. It stuck, but she helped gently. I pulled out the photo, creased at the corners, water-stained. A picture of me and Corwin, smiling, taken long before I understood what his smiles meant. I flipped it over. The same words stared back. "If they forget you, you remember who you are." Rivka watched but didn't speak. I met her eyes. "He thinks I'm gone. That's my advantage." She leaned back against the wall, arms crossed. "What do you want to do?" I thought about Corwin, about the way he smiled when he handed me that sandwich, like it was kindness, like he was already rewriting the ending before I could speak it. He probably drove back home and began composing the story he'd tell, polished, tragic, persuasive, practicing the right pauses, preparing the tears. But what he didn't account for was this: I didn't stay buried. He underestimated the roots. I looked at Rivka again, feeling something inside me settle into place, a fire rekindling. "Will you help me finish this?" She didn't flinch. "Absolutely," she said. And I believed her. With everything I had left. Rivka had an old iPad tucked into her duffel bag, one she used for trail maps and weather updates. It didn't connect to much, But when we found a sliver of signal outside a ranger station 20 miles south of the trailhead, she handed it to me. "Try it now," she said, shielding the screen from the glare. The connection was weak, barely hanging on, but the moment the homepage loaded, my heart slammed against my chest. There it was, a post, public, polished, complete with soft-filtered images of me and Corwin as kids. The caption read, "In loving memory of Peyton Harrington, sister, daughter, friend, you'll never be forgotten." I stared at it, fingers frozen mid-scroll. My obituary. He'd written my damn obituary. He included a tribute paragraph describing me as a quiet soul who struggled silently and found peace in the woods she loved. There were carefully curated photos, one of me at a family BBQ, one of us as teenagers, one of just a trail and trees. He even added a line about how I wasn't herself lately and had wandered too far alone. My blood turned to ice. "He's building a brand off my death," I muttered. Rivka looked over my shoulder. "He's trying to own the narrative." "No, he's trying to make sure no one asks questions," I said. "This isn't grief. This is PR." We drove the next day, silent for most of it. She didn't ask what I planned to do next, just handed me a burner phone and a pair of oversized sunglasses once we reached Bend. "Your move," she said simply. It had been over a week since the fall. My bruises were fading, but the pain in my ribs still barked when I breathed too deep. I wore a hoodie, my hair tucked into a ball cap, and stepped into my old life like a ghost. While Corwin was likely shaking hands and accepting condolences, I walked through the side gate and slipped into the house through the laundry room. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and cologne, my cologne, which meant he'd been sleeping here, living here, acting like this was his home now. I moved through the halls quietly. The kitchen counters were spotless. My mother's heirloom clock ticked steadily above the mantel. Everything in its place, except me. I turned on my smartwatch, navigated to the voice memo app, and hit record. It began capturing audio every 30 seconds automatically. I slipped it back onto my wrist, tightening the strap until it dug into my skin. Next stop, my bedroom. The door opened without a sound. Inside, the sheets were still rumpled from the last time I slept there. On the dresser sat my laptop, untouched but still plugged in. I opened it and held my breath as the screen flickered to life. Corwin hadn't wiped it. Everything was still there. Documents, saved passwords, emails, and, most importantly, the connection to the home's security system. I clicked through the camera history. Most files had been erased, but he didn't know they backed up to cloud storage. I downloaded what I could. One clip showed Corwin in the living room late at night, standing by the fireplace, rehearsing a eulogy. He was practicing how to cry. I watched him pace, clutching a glass of whiskey, eyes red but dry. Over and over, he tried different openings. She was always so sensitive. No one saw how much she struggled. I only wish I could have helped. I saved it all. Next, I moved to the office. On the desk were documents, folders full of legal letters, bank statements, and a recent wire transfer. Corwin had funneled $80,000 from one of my father's trust accounts into his company account. The date? The day after my accident. He wasn't just covering his tracks. He was cashing in. I sat on the couch and took a long, deep breath. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from restraint. This house, this room, this town, I had given everything to keep it together. And he had tried to erase me with a push and a story. I pulled out my phone and recorded a voice memo. No flourish, no poetry, just the truth. "You tried to erase me, Corwin, but you left fingerprints." After that, I packed everything I needed into one bag: hard drive backups, paper copies, audio files, the clip of him rehearsing. I deleted the original security system connection, turned off the Wi-Fi, and changed the locks on every door. Before I left, I stood in the foyer for a moment and looked up at the family portrait hanging above the stairs. I stepped onto a stool, took it down, and set it gently face down on the table. Then I walked out. Rivka picked me up a few blocks away. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. That night, in a small motel room on the edge of town, I drafted an email to Corwin. Subject, Family Files. Corwin, I'm sending over the documents you asked for. Let's meet in person. Tomorrow. Ashcroft Law, 9 a.m. P. No signature, no emotion, just bait. The next morning, I put on a black blouse, black slacks, tied my hair back, and slid a flash drive into my coat pocket. It was time. There was a tremor in his smile the second he saw me. It lasted no more than half a heartbeat, just a flicker, but I caught it, that twitch in the corner of his mouth, the faint rise of his brows, and the way his jaw tightened before he masked it with a laugh. Peyton, Corwin said, standing as if nothing about this was abnormal. You look, well. I didn't answer. I walked in, heels steady against the tile, black slacks crisp, blouse buttoned to the collar. I carried no purse, no folder, just a laptop under one arm and every ounce of composure I had ever learned to weaponize. The room went quiet. Seated at the table were two of Corwin's business partners, men I didn't recognize, and beside them, our family attorney, David Lorne, a man who had known us since before Mom passed. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. One of the associates dropped his pen, and I heard it clatter against the wood. Corwin was already speaking before I sat. I was just explaining the estate transition, he said, gesturing toward the conference table with a calm that made me want to scream. We're wrapping up some loose ends. Thank you for coming. I placed the laptop gently on the table and said, Please, continue. He opened his mouth, but the attorney interrupted, clearly shaken. Peyton, you thought I was dead. I finished for him. I'm aware. A hush settled again, thick and uncertain. Corwin recovered quickly, reaching for a water bottle. David cleared his throat. There's one issue before we proceed. We've had trouble accessing certain financial documents linked to your accounts. Corwin provided a password, but it didn't work. Corwin leaned back in his chair. It should try Annabelle 1982. I didn't let myself flinch. I just lifted my hand. That's not how you spell my name. All the years of being overlooked, of having my name left off invitations, of being edited out of photos, of being called overly sensitive or emotional, they all condensed into that single moment. That's not how you spell my name. 3 seconds of silence. Then 4. Corwin shifted again. I opened the laptop, powered it on, and waited for the login screen to appear. My fingers moved without hesitation. Once inside, I opened a folder labeled simply, Truth. The first file was an audio clip. I pressed play. It started with footsteps. His. A pause. Then Corwin's voice. Fly away. Another beat. Then, she's finally out of the way. I watched faces around the room pale. David removed his glasses. One of the partners muttered, Jesus Christ. There was no music, no cinematic sting, just the thud of impact, a grunt of air being forced from lungs, then silence. Corwin stood suddenly. You can't. I turned to him, calm and clear. Sit down. He didn't, so I stepped aside, and he lunged. Only it wasn't a violent lunge. He reached for the laptop, not me, but I was faster. I shut the lid and moved it behind me. David stood too, now holding up both hands. That's enough, he said firmly. We'll need to stop this meeting. Corwin was panting, face red. She's manipulating everything. This is fake. It's your voice, I said. Your words, your actions. I looked at the others. He didn't just try to steal the house or the trust. He tried to make me vanish, legally, financially, physically. Then I pulled out the flash drive from my pocket and handed it to David. It's all here. The transfers, the deleted footage, the medical power of attorney switch, the fake real estate documents, and his rehearsed eulogy. You'll like that one. He practiced 3 different versions in my living room. No one spoke, not even Corwin. I walked to the window, took a long breath, then turned back around. I wasn't lost. I wasn't broken. I was watching, waiting, documenting. David looked at the drive in his hand, then at me. Do you want this reported? I already have, I said. Let the authorities decide the rest. I gathered my laptop and prepared to leave, but paused at the door. You could have built a legacy with me, I told Corwin. Instead, you tried to inherit it alone. He said nothing. No apology, no denial. Just sat there, as if gravity had suddenly increased and he couldn't move beneath its weight. I walked out into the hall, past the front desk, and into the sharp light of midday. I didn't cry. I didn't run. I didn't look back. 3 blocks away, I stopped at a cafe and ordered a coffee. While I waited, I opened my phone. A headline was already circulating. Ashcroft family investigation opens, attempted murder allegations surface. I took my coffee and sat by the window, watching the street. People passed by, businessmen, college students, mothers with strollers. The world kept moving, and I was back in it. The dirt shifted slightly under my boots as I stepped to the edge. Same trail, same cliff, same sheer drop that had once promised to be my grave. Only this time, I wasn't here to die. I stood exactly where Corwin had tried to erase me, the spot where everything should have ended but didn't. My eyes scanned the ridgeline, following the steep, unforgiving terrain I'd somehow crawled down, hands bloodied, body breaking, but soul intact. That impossible stretch of ground hadn't taken me. It had tried and failed. The wind swept across the summit, cool and dry, carrying with it the scent of pine needles, sun-warmed stone, and a hint of snowmelt from somewhere higher up. It brushed against my face gently, like an acknowledgement, like a witness saying, "I remember." But it wasn't a warning this time. It felt like release. Rivka had dropped me at the base of the trail just after sunrise. She didn't offer a speech, didn't ask again if I was sure. She simply handed me a thermos of coffee, squeezed my shoulder, and nodded toward the incline. She knew this wasn't about proving anything. It was about returning. I climbed the trail in silence. No music, no earbuds, just the crunch of my boots on loose gravel and the sound of my breath. Steady, strong. The trail hadn't changed, but I had. At the ridge, I took off my pack and sat cross-legged on a flat rock overlooking the canyon. From inside a protective sleeve, I pulled out the photograph, creased at the corners, edges curled from too many hands, too many miles. It was one of Mom and me at the farmer's market when I was about 10. We were laughing, looking off camera, holding paper cones filled with roasted almonds. There was joy in that photo I hadn't seen in a long time. I flipped it over. The words, though faded, were still legible. If they forget you, you remember who you are. I knelt and placed the photo gently on the edge of the cliff. The wind lifted it once, teasing, but it settled again, flat against the stone. It belonged there now. "You didn't bury me," I whispered. "You carved the ground I climbed back up from." The silence that followed was vast, not lonely, just open. I let it sit there with me. I didn't rush the moment. I didn't cry. I stood, wiped my palms on my jeans, took one last look at the drop I'd survived, and turned back toward the trail. 3 days had passed since the meeting at the law office. 3 days since I'd faced Corwin again, not in court, but in the only place that seemed to matter anymore. Truth. Legally, there'd been no indictment, no video, no physical proof of what had happened on that ledge, but the media had done what the justice system couldn't. They held him accountable in ways that mattered. His name ran in headlines like, "Sister survives attempted murder disguised as hiking accident." "Family betrayal in the Cascades." "She returned from the dead and brought the truth with her." His business partners pulled out. Investors froze his assets. His public speaking gigs vanished. He became a cautionary tale whispered about behind boardroom doors and tweeted with hashtags no one wanted to be associated with. I didn't share the articles. I didn't post a single link. And when I pulled into the driveway of the house that used to be mine, once filled with echoes of holidays and childhood, I was met by silence. My father opened the door. He saw me. His eyes registered who I was, but he didn't speak. No hug. No apology. No acknowledgement of the daughter he'd allowed to disappear. He closed the door. No click of the lock. No final slam. Just a quiet shut. And that, oddly, was the deepest cut. Not a wound, just an ending I no longer needed to protest. I didn't knock again. Instead, I drove an hour out of town to a small stretch of land I'd first seen years ago, before all of this, before betrayal had turned my body into evidence and my memory into a battleground. I had once dreamed of building something here, something of my own. So I did. I bought the land outright, in cash. The cabin I built was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a wood stove in the center, and a garden out back. I painted every wall with my own hands, chose light colors, soft greens, and sun-washed yellows, big windows, open floor plan, solar panels on the roof, a porch with a swinging bench and firewood stacked underneath like it had always been there. It wasn't much, but it was mine. With Rivka's help, and the quiet guidance of a few women I now called friends, I started something else too. Resilience Rising, a non-profit, no flashy website, no celebrity endorsements, just a mission. Help women reclaim their lives after surviving the kind of betrayal that leaves bruises on the soul, not the skin. We didn't offer therapy. We offered skills, how to read financial documents, how to open your own checking account, how to build a budget, how to say no, how to hike, how to trust your own footsteps again, how to start a fire with nothing but dry moss and willpower. Once a month, we hiked. Together. Not long trails, just enough to feel your breath, to remind you your body is yours. On one of those climbs, near the summit, a young woman named Claire, 28 maybe, fell into step beside me. She was quiet, always had been. "Do you still talk to your brother?" she asked, gently. "No," I said. She waited. Then, "But do you hate him?" I paused. Then answered honestly, "No, I forgave him." She frowned. "How?" I looked at the sky, streaked with gold and pink. "Because forgiveness isn't reunion," I said. "It's freedom." At the top, I pulled out another photo. Me and Corwin as kids, sitting on the tailgate of Dad's old truck, bare feet and dripping ice cream cones. I laid it on a rock near a wildflower that had sprouted through 2 cracks. The wind lifted it briefly, then let it rest again. I didn't say goodbye to Corwin. I said goodbye to the version of him I had carried for too long, the version I tried to fix, the one who didn't exist anymore, if he ever had. As the group began their descent, I followed last. The air smelled like pine and something cleaner, something new. Rivka waited at the bottom, hands in her jacket pockets, face unreadable. When I reached her, she nodded once, and we walked back to the truck in silence. But it wasn't an empty silence. It was full. Peaceful. Because some cliffs don't break you, they remind you how high you can climb next. Some cliffs are not meant to break us. They're meant to shape who we become. This story wasn't just about survival. It was about identity, silence, and finally, voice. Forgiveness doesn't mean returning to the pain. It means choosing not to carry it any longer. What would you do if the person who tried to bury you was family? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life inspired stories that cut deep and heal deeper.